Hello, everyone. I'm Mark Champagne. I'm your host, and I want to welcome you to Change Ready, which is an original series brought to you by Behind the Human and Melosi. It's a series in which we are doing everything possible to future-proof your minds and our minds and thrive in an era of unprecedented change. And I'm so excited we have Meryl on the show today, who is someone that I think has a lot of experience in this topic and is just a wonderful human in general. A little bit about her. She's a visionary entrepreneur from Louisiana, a YPO member, and also has made remarkable impacts in agriculture. At just 21, she founded Kennedy Rice Mill, revolutionizing the agricultural sector. She later showcased her business acumen by transforming a struggling cookie dough venture into Neighbors LLC, now an award-winning success story. I mean, there's a million different things I can say about you, Meryl. Those are just a couple highlights, but welcome to the show.
Thank you. It is an absolute honor to be here.
Who are you?
You know, this question, I think, is one that I ask myself every morning in the mirror. Who
I
am
love
I?
that.
Yeah, who am I? Who am I showing up as today, right? Because the energy that you bring into a room does influence other people. And the more influence you have, the more important that energy is, right? And so when you're drained as a person, you can drain other people. And so right now, who I am is energized and excited. I really feel very strong about the future of where I'm going, but also super grateful, right? I think this week in particular, grateful really just comes to mind. So I hope I show up today like that to our audience here, but also I hope that I give that energy to other people.
I love it. Well, and just for everyone listening, for context, we're recording during the week of U.S. Thanksgiving. So a little extra gratitude this week. Meryl, I have to say, I've asked that question to about 400 people now, or posed that question to about 400 people now. And it's the first time anyone has said that I ask that question daily, which I love. And I'd love to ask a little bit more around that, because I'm making assumptions here, but I suspect at one point in your life, or maybe there's multiple points in your life, where something triggered you to kind of go down that self-reflective path or ask that question. Because I find most, and myself included, I mean, sometimes we forget, right? And then we ask the who am I question when we hit a wall, or when something feels, misaligned, and like how did I get here, and so forth. So where did that come from for you? Did you learn that from someone?
I think that's a great reflection point, because yes, there has absolutely been times in my life where I have realized that I have allowed people to drag me along their path of who they think I should be, right?
Yeah.
And then you do wake up and you're like, okay, how did I find myself? Why am I doing this? Why am I spending time here? Right. So all these things I think absolutely matter. And I've been really, really intentional, probably since having my third child. I feel like my world got rocked. I'll be honest with you. I wasn't trying to have a third child. And I had finally kind of, gotten everything I felt like in my type A way. I was doing this. And then all of a sudden I get pregnant. We were still recovering from the pandemic. There was just so much in my life that didn't need that kind of on top of it, right? Not that I, didn't want to or bring life into the world, but it was just really,
It's a big deal.
it was the thing that you drop on your life that, everything else kind of crumbles. And as I was, getting nearer and nearer to D-Day, as I call it, I had a lot of people pulling at me, asking me to do things. And I started really paying attention more to, is this bringing me value, right? Do I actually really need to do this? Is this something that is giving me energy, right? Am I showing up for other people energetic, or is this draining me? And actually, I'm draining all these other people around me, right? Because I'm drained every day I show up. And I have really tried over the last year and a half to look at myself, as I mentioned there, and say, okay, Meryl, who are you today? Is this your best self? Are you doing the things that bring value to not only yourself, but to the other people around you? Um, and being intentional about that is, I
Yeah.
think, so important, right? And she taught me that. So I
Mm.
give all the credit to my daughter who taught me to live life with intentionality. And
What a beautiful gift.
she's been truly a gift to me. Changed
Wow.
my life.
What have you noticed? I just love it because I I'm a big fan, especially when it comes to mental fitness, which is what I would classify this under, is that there are moments in the day in our lives and whatnot that they don't have to be huge and grandiose. I mean, obviously, bringing third child to the world is a big thing, but I mean the check-in question, like something like that takes seconds, but it has so much impact and I want to say like it predicts how your day essentially will unfold. So but what
100%.
have you noticed just since starting that practice?
Well, I thought I was fairly good, and I still, probably am. When you're a person that has, a lot of high stress and things on you, you tend to learn to deal with those. And your breaking point is maybe not as noticeable, right, as someone that doesn't deal with stress. But that doesn't mean that you don't break,
Sure.
or you can't break, right? And in fact, maybe when you break, it's worse
Mm,
because you've really shoved a lot of those, emotions and things down deep to where when you break, it's like all of it is kind of out there in the open, exposed. What I have found is that again, it goes back to the energy equation. When I am at my best as a leader is when I am finding myself in a place of I don't want to call it happiness because you're not going to be happy in every moment. I mean,
of course.
I still face a lot of, decisions I don't like or, rejections or these things that are, or maybe, I have to let someone go. I mean, these are really difficult things and they weigh on you from a, a mental aptitude standpoint. I mean, they really do. But if you feel like, you are in your best place, right? And you're giving off that energy and you're using your time, you have more awareness of where you put your time and energy, then you can feel when you need to refuel better. And that's what I
Yes.
wasn't doing before. I just was shoving it all down,
Mhm.
just kept on piling it in, right? And then I
Pushing
would
through.
break just as any human will, but I didn't have any awareness of like, hey, you're reaching the breaking point, Meryl. Like maybe
Yeah.
maybe you should have, taken half a day off or gone and done something for yourself or, you know, did a couple day retreat or something, right? I was unbreakable in my mind. And that's
Mm,
not true. That's not the human element. We're breakable, right? And we
yeah.
really have to reflect on that, I think, and we have to give our mind space to realize, hey, I'm reaching this point. I need to step back because otherwise, if I don't, then I'll start showing up in a way that's not positive, that does influence people negatively.
I think a lot of people listening, sorry, I was muted there. I think a lot of people listening, myself included, can really resonate with kind of pushing through, I guess, the signs, or you don't even realize that the signs are there, right? So, I feel compelled to ask the question for you now that, like, what are some of those signs for you that when they come up, you're like, okay, hold on a second. To your point, I need a little bit more space, maybe for the mind, and maybe that's taking a bit of time off, or whatever that looks like for you, or double down on some of the practices. But what comes up for you personally?
Yeah. So, when for instance, I mean, I've noticed that, I can pretty much handle two really hard things a day. When I
Mm,
start loading in 3, it becomes challenging. Like occasionally I'll find myself where I think I'm focusing in on an email or focusing, maybe I had a difficult conversation right before I need to do a
Sure.
task, right? And I'm trying to focus, but I'm not really reading, right? I'm really actually not even there. I'm still back
Yeah.
in the difficult discussion, right? So before I would have answered that email because I need to get it done. It needs to happen right now. It needs to happen, right?
Yeah.
But I made mistakes doing that, right? I said the wrong thing, or I didn't open properly, or I didn't say like, hey, Mark, how was your
Y-
day? How are you feeling? Instead, I was like, hey, Mark, I need you to do this is it, right? Like it. So
Yeah.
again, like I didn't make that person on the other side. I needed them to do something for me. I didn't make them feel valued. I didn't give them energy. I didn't, right? Because my energy was gone. So
Yeah.
instead, when I find myself like s- my mind is not focused in on what I'm doing, then it's just an example of a moment where I'm like, okay, I'm not here. Actually, I'm back there. So maybe I need to go take a walk. Sometimes I'll just go outside and I'll take a walk. Um, and maybe I'll call a friend, like move my mind to something else, and then I'll come back. And if I still can't focus, then I don't do it that day.
Oh,
And that
yeah.
has been challenging for me.
Yeah. Because that's not the
Um,
norm.
I think that my team sometimes is like, where is she or whatever, but I still feel like I'm moving at a pretty high pace,
Yeah.
but not showing up in a way that brings my highest value in the situation is sometimes worse than timely responses, right?
For sure. Well, and this whole thing with time, like what's crazy is I imagine, when you say you're not responding, immediately, again, I'm making assumptions, but that might be like you might respond the next day or something. But
Yeah, exactly.
right, but we've gotten in this flow as society that it has to be like
It's instant,
seconds.
instant, instant.
It's crazy. Yeah.
It really is crazy because, I remember the days, and they weren't really that long ago, where, I had a secretary and, someone would come visit me and she would give them a cup of coffee and she would say, hey, can you wait here? Because Meryl's on a phone call. And so, again, use the restroom, all these kind of
Yeah.
things.
Just
Now,
sit down.
sit down, just
Yeah.
sit, right? Now, I love this kind of technology, don't get me wrong. I
Of
mean,
course.
Zoom and Teams and all the different platforms have given me a lot more time off the road, and so I think there's value, but there also is trade-off because there's not an ability to move from one meeting sometimes, and so again, your mental capacity, like,
Yeah.
and so you have to be intentional, like, don't overschedule yourself because maybe there's an hour left on the calendar, right? And if you get to a point where you realize that you have, because we all do, especially us type A's, right? And
Yeah.
probably people listening to this podcast are going to be type A's. Allow yourself to say no, like
Yeah.
I'm going to do this later, or I'm going to take 30 minutes, or if it worst case scenario, if it just has to be done, then someone else needs to do it, right?
Sure.
And in many cases, someone else can do it potentially. And it's better in a way to have that than for you to, as a leader, to come off as not there,
Yeah.
not engaged, or
Totally.
yeah,
Totally. It's so powerful. Often for me, what's helped on my side is I reflect back and like you, like even the fact that we're using a lot of technology just to have this conversation. So I'm super grateful for all of it as well. But the thing that sometimes crosses my mind is, well, hold on a second. I mean, there was a period of time, and it's not that long ago, where very successful businesses were created and operated and run in a way where you would literally mail a letter, as the next step and have to wait, what, maybe weeks to get some sort of response. And somehow, right? Yeah, exactly. And it worked. And again, I'm not saying we have to go back to that, but I feel like the pendulum has swung so far to the other side. And, given the space that I work in, I see the result of that when it comes to the health of our minds and so forth. So, we just need some reminders that it's going to be okay if you take a breath, right?
Well, I agree. I do think we need some reminders of that. I was actually in DC last week working on the Farm Bill, and you'll love this because of your letter story. But I noticed that by our Congresswoman's office, there was a chute for letters.
Oh, amazing.
Okay, how amazing is this, right?
Yeah.
And so, I mean, they would put a letter there, and then it would fall down into a mailroom, right? And
Yeah.
so, but that is the reality, and
Yeah.
there was work done that way, and so time is relative, right? But if you're not using yours wisely, if you're letting other people use it for you, that's when the problem happens.
Yes, exactly. Exactly. Okay, I would love to thank you for we really just jumped right into the mental fitness piece and mindset, which I love. But I want to set some context to your work and what you do. And I think as well, it's you're probably one of the first individuals that I've had on, well, definitely direct in your direct industry, but even just in, I'd say farming and, just food and nutrition. And I remember when we first met, we talked a little bit about this, but and I want to get your perspective, especially now, there's just a lot of, I don't want to, maybe this is the wrong language, but I feel like there's a lot of heat on the industry.
You think there's
Um,
a lot of heat on the
there's a
industry.
lot of heat. And sure, maybe there's some justification to that, but I mean, I tend to lean on the side of our friends at the media really go hard in just like a clickbaity way. And then there's a whole side of a story that's never told. And especially when it comes to the incredible humans that are literally feeding us, like we're so fast to judge and like demonize an industry in a way that I don't think is fair. So I'd love to, like, where are you at right now with the state of the industry? And I mean, obviously you're just coming out of an election and so forth, and there's some interesting, I think, changes around, I think, just health in general, just seeing some of the people coming in and whatnot. But like, how are you feeling about the industry and the work that you're
Yeah.
doing?
So, I love this question. I love that somebody asked me this question. I'll be honest with you, because that is a hard question, right? But I think that it takes sometimes hard questions to really get people to understand what we're facing as an industry.
Yeah.
So the reality is that you're absolutely right. There is the faces of many men and women that have toiled the land, that are
Mm,
small business owners, really, that do their best every single morning they get up. And the reality is that those farmers are at the very bottom of the totem pole of what we think of as our food industry, right? So they are doing everything they can, and for the last, I mean, it goes back decades now, to grow food as cheap as possible. Because
yeah.
as a country, and frankly maybe as a world, but definitely as, the United States, we have come to accept food should be cheap, okay? And
Hmm.
so that, it's a little bit, um, it's a like, we want our cake and eat it too, right? We want food to be
Yeah.
extremely cheap, but yet we want to make sure it's healthy. And yet we
Yeah.
want to make sure that, we're, feeding our children right. And of course, there's so much attention being put on all the different childhood illnesses that are happening, and why are we having so many children that are suffering from, all, autistic type symptoms,
Yeah.
or Asperger's, or whatever
ADHD.
you want. Is this something in the food? Is this medicine? What are we doing wrong, right? I mean, the reality is the consumer, myself included, because I'm a mom, just wants to know, like, what are we doing wrong so we can fix it, right? But instead of really trying to answer those questions, we're taking, I think, some of the scare tactics from the media, and then we're assuming them as fact, and then judging the ones that are really at the bottom of the food chain. Okay.
Hmm.
When it was us as consumers, and I mean us too, because I don't like going to the grocery store and paying more money, but that
Yeah.
demanded on agriculture to grow food cheaper,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah, I agree with that.
So we're part of that. Like we're part of the system and the reason why um we are here today. And so I think, the reality is that, we had massive inflation and everybody knows that over the last couple years. And so through that, and then it's not just inflation. I mean, the ag industry has suffered from, and I mean, this again goes back
It,
to COVID, from just extreme pressure to deliver during COVID, to make sure that we had parts in the grocery store shelves, to make sure that we had food security, to make sure that we were delivering on all these things. I mean, I think we all remember this feeling of like, oh my God, we might not have food in our pantry. We might not be able to feed our kids, right? We forget
yeah.
sometimes, but I think we all had that. Then we went into a war with, one of the leading countries that creates, pretty much all the nitrogen and inputs that we need to grow our crops, right? So all of our input costs went up substantially. As some of those have gone down, we've had high interest rates, right? So family farms, again, these are small businesses. I mean, they're suffering while our government leaders and consumers and large, consumer good companies and retailers and whatever have been saying, you can't charge this much. You need to lower your prices. And then people in the bottom of the field are saying, how? Like,
Yeah. Yeah.
we don't have any relief from these costs. Like, we don't have any relief anywhere. And so, it's been, honestly, last week, I had an opportunity to kind of reflect back on like, how do we get where we are today? How do we fix the problem? But also like, how do we really fix the problem? How do we determine like what is causing the consumer's concerns? How do we produce food that is, you know, holistic in a way that consumers feel good about where their food is coming from and make sure that they really understand like that it's not really the big ag that's causing, a
Yeah.
lot of these issues, right? We as a society, we pay less for food than any other country in the world. I don't know if people realize that, but as a per income, we pay the least amount, right? And again, if you want nutritious food in a way, you I think the consumer is demanding that from ag. So I think that's unbelievable, right? I think that it'll make us smarter. But I do think that there's a trade-off for that, right? I mean, you have to be willing to say that we're going to have to think differently. So we're going to have to experiment in a way. And we only get one crop a year. So if you're only going to get one crop a year, it's a lot more challenging to make big, risky decisions when your family's livelihood is at stake, right?
Hmm.
You can't make those decisions on your own, right? You can't say, like, I'm going to risk the whole family farm because you know, I want to do things differently. Like you really have to make sure that you're being thoughtful and intentional in these things. And then we are seeing a huge increase of pressure from imported food that's coming into this nation. Again, why? It's cheaper.
Yeah.
So it doesn't have the same regulations that we have here in the US as far as food safety. It doesn't have the same regulations as we have as far as pesticide usage. It doesn't have all these regulations. And yet we're willing to buy it, right?
Yeah.
So I really, again, I think that you can see it. And I'm for a free economy. I mean, I think that, having alternative foods brought in. I don't have a problem with that. I only have a problem when it's food that we directly grow here and we're choosing not to buy that because our farmers can't sell it at a price that makes sense. So what ends up happening is that they lower the quality of their product to meet market demand somewhere export and we just import other food, right?
Yes.
So it's
Yeah.
it's really it's a difficult equation. There's a lot of other countries too that subsidize because of this, right? So we're seeing heavy subsidies in many nations that go against WTO regulations. And I
Hmm.
could talk about this for hours, but I mean, when we're not holding those countries accountable to those things and then they're bringing in food cheaper, again, we as consumers have to look at ourselves and say, am I willing to pay for better food that, in my opinion, creates a better world, right? It's more sustainable, less
Yeah.
impact on the environment, but also for food security to make sure that our farmers stay in business so that we are continue to be the food basket of the world, right? Um, and in that meantime, I guess give a little grace to the people that are at the bottom of the food chain in a way, right? I mean, they're the most important part, actually, of the whole food equation, and yet they get
Often
forgotten a
overlooked.
lot of times
Yeah. Yeah.
for, how low they are on, making some of these decisions for us.
Yeah.
And lastly, I mean, I could talk about this for hours, but
Well, that's why I asked the question. I think
yeah,
it's
I
really
do.
important to have this
Yeah,
conversation.
I think it's so important. I do think that we need to hold our officials accountable for doing real research on important issues. So,
What do you mean?
well, like for instance, if we believe, so rice has been under a lot of scrutiny for arsenic. The
Hmm.
rice industry has done a lot of research on arsenic and if it's harmful for the body and have determined that it's not. Yet we're still regulating arsenic because it's scary, right? I mean, there's a scary
Yeah.
connotation with arsenic. Arsenic is found in a lot of different fruits and vegetables. So it's, that again have been proven not to be harmful. But we we as a government, I mean, and I say this, we as a nation, we haven't really studied the impact. I mean, we as in rice industry have, but I haven't seen anybody else study to say like, there's no real answer out there in society, I guess, is why we're suffering from certain childhood, and problems, right? What's causing obesity? What's causing diabetes? What's causing some of these big problems? I'll
Yeah.
call it, right? And is it, autism, for instance? Is it something that we're doing as mothers in utero or not? I mean, I've heard all different kinds of conflicting hypotheses, but no
Yeah.
real answer. And so
Yeah.
I just, to me, it's a challenge on the whole system to figure out what is it? What could we do differently um, as an industry for ag in particular? Because I think we as ag won't, if we're part of the problem, we want to fix it, right? When we have children
Yeah.
too, like you know what I mean? We are suffering from the same things that everyone is suffering from. Um, but to demonize us and to say it's your fault, it's kind of like, well, where's the proof? Where's the
Yeah.
scientific evidence? Where's the people telling me, and that's where big media comes in and where the scare tactics and all these things happen, right?
Yeah.
Um so I I really, to me, I think that it's a matter of it's a matter of consumers really changing their mindset too on how they think about food and what they want from their food system. Do they always just want it to be cheap or do they want it to do something more for them, right?
Well, yeah, to me, that's the fundamental question. Because even I think some of the diseases you're mentioning. I mean, it's hard to ignore, and it's not just the food. It's like everything.
Everything,
There's chemical everywhere,
everywhere.
and if we think about it, I think just logically, that can't be good for us as humans. But because of like what you're saying, this is why I love your perspective and framing. It comes from us. Like I think we have to ask different questions around, well, do I want it as cheap as possible? And this is where I feel like we don't ask the next question. What does that actually mean? And is it actually as cheap as possible?
Yeah,
Because if
or is it
I'm going to
actually
get
causing other problems, right? Like your
exactly,
medical bills
exactly,
are so much
right?
higher, right? then
Totally.
maybe it's not really that cheap.
No. And like everything else, the side effects of just that kind of defaulting to cheap as possible. I don't know. I mean, I'm biased, obviously, and we have listen. We have a family here as well, two young boys, and I look at our grocery bill, and we try to buy as much as possible from our, especially in market season here. Then now that it's getting colder in Canada, I mean, we go directly to the farm. But even with that, it's I think it's this mindset and perspective shift around, well, maybe the cantaloupe is not going to come through the sun. Like, it, where's that coming from? It's not growing here right
Well,
now. Well,
mhm.
there's, when there's 3 feet of snow kind of thing. And again, just I think questioning at the individual level and being okay to, buck the conveniences that we've gotten used to,
Yeah.
and ask some questions around, well, is that how it used to be? Like, did we evolve like that? And probably not.
Well, I'll tell you, we witnessed it. It really worries me on pretty deeply because here in my area of Louisiana, I witnessed a world where cotton was king.
Mm,
Okay. So in the South, cotton was king. And when cotton was produced here, we had gins here where they would actually gin the cotton. And then there was the textile factories that would make our clothes. Okay.
okay.
So this is a real example that we can kind of tangibly see, I think, as consumers. So over time, it was cheaper to make garments overseas. So we
Okay.
exported the textile mills. Okay.
Mm,
Then it was cheaper to gin the cotton overseas. So we exported our gins. Then it was cheaper to grow the cotton overseas, right?
oh,
So
yeah.
then we grew the cotton
Ugh,
overseas. Okay. Now,
yeah.
there's some cotton still grown here in the US, very limited. But as a whole, now we have a fast fashion industry that produces us cheap clothing, but it
Hmm.
doesn't last.
Yeah.
And we have a lot of issues with, you know,
Yeah. Who's producing it?
who's producing it
All
and
of it. Yeah.
whatever. And we've exported a lot of our manufacturing too, right? So now we're dependent on these countries for our clothing. Okay.
Yeah.
Can you imagine a world where we were dependent on them for our food? And that's a scary world to me, maybe because I am in agriculture, but I do believe in food security. And I think that
Yeah.
if anybody can take themselves back to COVID and
Us.
remember the feeling of not knowing if you would have food, then you would realize just how important food security is for a nation. And if you have the ability to have it, why would you not? Right? I mean, and
Yeah.
we have the best scientists. I mean, we have so many people here that can help us, I think really get to some of those big questions in a more powerful way.
Hmm.
Um, but I share that example with you only to say, like, it's one thing to buy your clothes somewhere else. It's another thing to rely solely on food from other places. And
Yeah.
do we trust them to do things better than us? I mean, child labor is a big problem in some of these countries, right? I mean, the
Hmm.
U.S. farmer is known as the most sustainable in the world as far as, less pesticide usage and less use. So although we use all these chemicals and things, yes, when you look at what we do in comparison, it's like night and day, right?
Yeah.
So it's a challenging question, right? But I do think it means that we're going to have to be willing, as consumers, to think a little bit differently, too, about what food
For
we choose
sure.
to put in our body. What do we choose to fuel our minds with? What do we choose to fuel our bodies with?
For sure. Well, it's just, yeah. I mean, you're hitting on my topic, obviously, and it's because that's the other big thing right now. I see and feel like we don't think about what we fuel our minds with. And then I think in general, with everything that we're talking about, as soon as we go onto this autopilot, kind of mode and just we're not asking questions and not thinking, especially on like the mental nutrition, we're thrown down a path that unfortunately, and I wish this wasn't the case, but will lead us into becoming a mental health statistic. I mean, the data is so clear. On the nutrition side of things, it's kind of, you enter into a supermarket. If you're just following the flow in the advertising, like you're coming out with a brown cart of and sugary stuff. Like it's just so we need to pause and ask some questions. And again, I just love the framing here of because we can if we put it on ourselves and not in a place of judgment, but just let's ask some questions if we want to be at our best and to your point and support our society and our country and so forth. I mean, we've got to make some changes because what the current track is just not working, right? And
No,
I think we deserve better.
I think we absolutely deserve better. And I think that food is medicine. I'm a big believer
Yes,
in this.
for sure.
And I do think that if you think of yourself as a car and, you keep feeding it, cheap gasoline or whatever,
Yeah.
um, you're not going to run very long.
No.
So, what you put in does absolutely affect everything.
Yeah.
You're a machine. Your body is meant to, and it's you have to feed it well. And that
Yeah.
also is mental too. I absolutely agree with all your work on that. I think what you feed your mind is so important too.
Yeah.
Your senses, right? Your eyes eat. I mean, even we know this from the food industry. This is why when you go in a store, a lot of the apples will look exactly the same. Like, or in the rice
Yeah.
industry, we take out the damage so that they're all white and beautiful, and a
Yeah.
lot of that is because you eat with your eyes, right? And
Yeah.
so your mind is taking in so much visually.
Hmm.
And so using all your senses, I think is important.
So Meryl, I mean, you're directly in this industry, of course. You're obviously, a consumer as well, of food and your mom and so forth. It just feels like potentially a lot of pressure to hold and a responsibility in a way. I'm just curious, and your industry in the world just in general is changing so fast. It's just a lot in general. So what are some of your like non-negotiable practices or things that you do on a frequent basis that allow you to, not stew in that pressure and be able to think and ask some of the beautiful questions that you've left already in this conversation? Like those are not questions that typically surface when we're in a survival mode and we're just trying to get to the end of the day. Like these are deep, big questions that, usually surface when our mind is somewhat clear.
It goes back to our first part of this conversation, right? I really do look at myself in the mirror every day and say, who am I, right? Who am I showing
Yeah.
up as? And I try to be honest with myself, right?
Mm.
Because sometimes it's not good.
Yeah,
Okay.
sure.
I
Yeah.
mean, I mean, let's just be clear. I'm not
Let's close
perfect
the
every
eyes.
day, right? I mean,
Yeah.
this is not some. I don't want anybody to put me on a pedestal in a way that's, I always tell people I'm human, right? I'm just as
Yeah.
you are, right? Um, I'm not somebody to be put on a pedestal that can't be broken, but I do try to ask myself the question fairly often around, is this a weight I'm willing to carry?
Mm.
Okay. And that question has been probably, again, something that I've formed really since having Bertie Rose. I'll tell her this one day when she's old enough to know it, but she changed my life, profoundly in the way that I really do look at the world because um, I was carrying a lot of weight, and not all of it was my weight to carry.
Yeah.
So, when you think about, your basket of responsibilities or the things that you need to carry and what you should be carrying and what energizes you and what, really your best self, right? What makes you you, what makes you your best self. There's things in everyone's basket that I would say are not theirs to carry. And not something that they need to be carrying, because if they are, then they're not being their best self, right? And so taking those items out is very difficult, but
Yeah.
I think
Yeah.
really important. So anytime I take on something else, I've been asking myself, is this the weight I need to carry? And maybe I need to hire somebody to carry this weight for me. Maybe I need to ask somebody, in my network, or maybe I don't need to take the responsibility at all. Um, but I think that protects me a lot, because I do want to help. I find it to be my calling to help move people to answer these questions. I mean, the
So
idea that we're
powerful.
even having this
So powerful.
conversation to me is just thrilling, because I want to answer these questions and help people understand their role in our food system, and what we as a society can do to push our legislators or people in these kind of positions to really think different about ag, and then to respect the people that that I love so much, that are on the ground doing the best they can every day, right? I want to showcase those people in a light that makes them heroes that they are, and not demons that we've made them, right? So I find that just thrilling. And if I start taking on a bunch of stuff that doesn't align kind of with that mission, then I've failed what I think is my purpose.
Ugh, so well said. And I can't think of a better way to put a pin in the conversation. I had kind of final wrap up questions, but I actually don't want to interrupt that last flow of consciousness and intention and purpose. So I'll close by just saying thank you for coming on the show, for being so open, and for really I think everyone can feel it, like sharing your truth and what you're also navigating, and the questions that you're having to reflect on and so forth. And I'm sure I can speak for many, a higher thank you for what you're doing for. It's not just you. I mean, there's the ripple effect of the work and your team within the industry, and in conversations like this really has an exponential impact. So thank you for that.
Well, thank you, Mark. I mean, thank you for asking me the tough questions, right? I think that's the only way we solve some of these big issues, is we ask each other, we're willing to listen, and we're willing to stretch ourselves. So,
Yeah.
being willing to do those things does mean that we have to clear our minds to be able to really think about how to solve big problems. But at the end of the day, that's what makes life exciting.